and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Entertainment Network. I am your host, Sarah. As always, I am delighted to be with you on another Tuesday, bringing you another author interview. As we get started, I do want to remind you, as I usually do, to please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you are either listening to or watching this episode on. Also, if you want to help support the podcast and the network in another way, you can go to gsmcpodcast.info. You see that link next to me in the video that is playing. There you can leave a tip or a donation. That really does help not just my podcast, but the entire network. If you want to leave a question or a comment while you're there, that's great as well. I'd be happy to engage with questions and comments at the beginning of the next episode after receiving them. So once again, that link is gsmcpodcast.info if you want to support the network and this podcast in a different way. As always, every ounce of support that you have given the podcast over the years is greatly appreciated, whatever form that support comes in. As we get started, how is your week going? It's Tuesday, so it's the beginning of the week. We're smack in the middle of August now, which is crazy. Time just keeps trucking forward, right? Did you have a good weekend? Did you do anything fun or relaxing? We spent a good chunk of Saturday in the pool. That was nice. We haven't been going down to the pool as much in the last few weeks. Not really sure why. Just one of those things where, other things are happening or we get busy or what have you. But we spent a good chunk of Saturday afternoon in the pool. It was beautiful, lovely, wonderful. We met a family that we had never met before. They apparently come every year and stay in one of the other places in our complex. But we got to thinking of what we've been doing the last 2 Augusts, and we've had other things going on the last 2 Augusts. So apparently we weren't at the pool to meet this family in August of the previous 2 years. So that was nice. They're from the UK. Always good to meet people from other places and learn about their lives and their experiences. And they said they've been coming here for 16 years. So that's impressive, coming to the same place every summer and seeing how things change and grow. And I don't know, for me, that's fun and entertaining. And it's great for the hubby because he is way more extroverted than I am. So whenever he can meet people and talk to people and have good long conversations, it's great. I can float around and listen and interject occasionally, and he can have conversations. So that was fun. But that was our weekend. Sunday, just our typical Sunday. Talk to my mom, which I usually do on Sundays, and that's always nice. Catch up on everything. She was laughing because my hometown is very small, and her sister came to visit last week, and she had brought my mom a bunch of stuff. So she made several trips back and forth to her car. And one of my mom's neighbors, who I've never met her, she's relatively new, but still been there long enough that she, she didn't recognize my aunt. So I'm not sure. Anyway, she tracked my brother down at the grocery store where he works in our small hometown and demanded to know whether he'd sold my mom's house because somebody else was moving stuff into the house. And he was like, no. But if you don't live in a small town and you've never had this experience, that's very common. But hey, at least she's keeping an eye out. She's checking in with my brother, although it's made me laugh that she asked if he sold my mom's house. But anyway, small town antics, actually, and we get that here too in our town here in Portugal. It's not as small of a town as the one I grew up in, but it has some very small town vibes. So my mom and I were sharing small town life stories in our conversation on Sunday. But that is neither here nor there. We are here to talk about books, a specific book, in this case, Colossal Words for Kids. My guest this week is Colette Hiller. Let me pull that up for you and then redo the description of the book. This book, I was so excited about this book because this book is Colossal Words for Kids, 75 tremendous words neatly defined to stick in the mind. And let me give you the description. Each poem in this funny, funky book teaches a specific important word, as well as its meaning and spelling, in an innovative and accessible format that kids will love. Using rhythm and wordplay, the poems help build a colossal vocabulary, thinking skills, and literacy, without kids even noticing. But most of all, this book delights young readers with the joy and silliness of the English language. Building a colossal vocabulary has never felt so natural or so much fun. Each word in this collection is defined in a simple rhyme. Using rhythm, humor, and logic, each word's meaning is made clear and accessible. Kids will want to try them out straight away. It's a ready-to-use collection. You and your kids will love. Rolling rhymes that can be chanted again and again. Fun and quirky drawings that bring these educational poems to life. Holistic learning premise from Colette Hiller, skilled in writing educational poetry for children. From ambiguous to zealous, the words in this book are for 7 to 12-year-olds. It may seem inconceivable for one book to encompass such a wide span, but in fact, inconceivable and all the other words in this book were selected from vocabulary lists intended for older children, so that younger children can challenge themselves and discover a wealth of great new words. So again, that is the description of Colossal Words for Kids by Colette Hiller, my guest today. And as I said, I was so excited when this came across my email many months ago because I love vocabulary. I'm sure I have mentioned that on this podcast before. I kept thinking about the fact that when I was 9 or 10, I remember I was probably 9 because I was remember specifically using this word on a camping trip with my best friend, and we started being best friends around 9 or 10. And I learned the word dilapidated, and I thought that was the coolest sounding word, and I made sure that I incorporated it whenever I could. So I remember hiking on this camping trip with her family, and there was a building that was falling down off the side of the trail, and I remember insisting, being very careful to say, that is a dilapidated building. And my friend just looked at me like, yeah, okay, weirdo. I love words. I love the way words sound. So it's not always the definition of a word for me. I just love the way some words sound, like dilapidated. I loved the sound of that word when I was younger. But this book, as I say in the interview, caught me from the very first page. It's one of the 75 words, but Colette uses it in the very first paragraph, and that is penultimate, another of my favorite words. So I was already all in on this book before I started reading it, and then she threw penultimate at me, so I was good. Let's go ahead though and get started with the interview. Again, the book, the shorter version of the book is Colossal Words for Kids. There's a much longer name that I read for you earlier. And I will tell you again, actually, you know what? Let me tell you again the entire name. I just want to make sure I get it right. Colossal Words for Kids, 75 tremendous words, neatly defined to stick in the mind. And again, the author is Colette Hiller. Let's go now to that interview. Colette, hi, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Sarah.
I'm so happy to have you here. I'm very excited to talk to you about your book, Colossal Words for Kids. But before we do that, if you would take just a few minutes to share just a little bit about yourself so my listeners can get to know you a bit.
Sure. I'm Colette, and this is my second children's book. The first one was also with Quarto, and it's called The B on Your Thumb, as in the letter B. And that one was to teach reading through rhyme. And this book moves on from there, and it teaches big words through rhyme. And my own background is that I was an actress for many years with the Royal Shakespeare Company and in the original cast of Annie in London and many different things. And then I moved to the BBC as a producer, and I was very, very interested in quick ways of making kids smart, really effective, efficient ways of teaching. And I worked right across all the BBC departments, news and education and children's, and education was something I was very much interested in. And then I became a cultural producer, and some of my projects have been produced across the world. So I'm the person that brought pianos to the streets, and something called Talking Statues, which was also produced in Chicago. Big cultural projects that help cities to feel a sense of themselves and bring joy to people in cities. And there's a slight similarity in the education approach, in as much as I'm always interested in quick ways of achieving a result. So when I put pianos in the streets, it was really to make the city feel friendly. And it was all about a quick way to make a city feel like a friendly place that belongs to you. And with big words, my aim in this book is for children to grow up understanding that they are natural wordsmiths and words are theirs. They're not in territory, barging into territory that isn't theirs. These are their words. They're laying claim to them. And so it's establishing that claim right from the get-go. The only one other thing perhaps to add is that I have a best-selling children's album that sold about now 80,000 copies. It's called Applehead. And I did it a long time ago, but it's still available and it's still selling and it's still enchanting kids across the world. And it's really for under sixes, and it's a story with songs about a very small character called Applehead. So that's available. And I guess the last thing to say is that I've always, my approach to educational teaching or producing is always expecting and knowing that children are smart. And my approach is not patronizing and it's not complicated. It's a way to make them feel smart and boost their confidence with that. So that's a little bit about my background. Oh, and I suppose people would like to know that I've been in some famous movies, and one of them is Aliens, and that gets a lot of attention. And so I'm the pilot in that movie.
And I love hearing authors introduce themselves, but there's always so many questions that I would love to have like an hour-long conversation with people about all the other things they do in their life. But we're here to talk about your book. And I'll try to keep my other questions to a minimum. I always have so many questions when authors give their brief introductions. I really want to ask them just a million bajillion questions about their life. And maybe I should, I don't know, start scheduling more time for that, or maybe I should start a new podcast. I don't know. I'm very, very nosy, and Colette's life sounds really, really fascinating. But we're here to talk about her book, which we are going to do shortly. So we're going to take that first break, and when we come back, more about Colossal Words for Kids. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to work, cause my boss is a jerk, and I'm not even that paid. I need a change in my life, cause I don't feel alive, and there's nothing that makes me happy. Hold my beer for a minute, I'm about to quit my job, cash in for a ticket. I'm going on a trip and I don't plan to visit. I'm gonna stay there till I feel like I'm winning, and this is just the beginning. I need a big change, help me feel like living. I need a big swing, home runs I'm hitting, and I'll never look back, moving on till I get it all. And we all got dreams, we all want things, but what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be? And do you believe you can do anything?
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Colette Hiller. Before the break, Colette was giving a brief introduction to her very interesting life. I was trying to tamp down my natural curiosity and not ask her a million questions. We're going to get back to that interview, but before we jump back into the interview, just another quick reminder that you can support the podcast by going to gsmcpodcast.info and leave a tip or donation if you want to support not just the podcast, but the network as a whole in a monetary fashion. Again, thank you so much for all of the support you've given over the years. And once again, that link is gsmcpodcast.info. So as I said before the break, introduction from Colette. And now we're going to go ahead and return to the interview so you can learn more about this fabulous book. The book's full title is Colossal Words for Kids, 75 Tremendous Words, Neatly Defined to Stick in the Mind. So we get 75 words. You talked a little bit about, having kids own vocabulary. I love words. So I was so excited when this came across through my email. Talk a little bit about coming up with the idea for the book and
Yeah.
where it came from?
It's really very interesting. Children are by nature natural wordsmiths. I mean, give them a good word that they can understand and they will want to use it.
Mhm.
For some reason, we don't teach big words to smaller children. We just leave that. We go out of our way not to use a big word, in fact. But my premise with these 75 words is I wanted 75 useful big words, and the useful part's really important. I didn't want just an adjective to describe 8 swans with 1 eye. You know, it had to be something useful. So a word like relentless may not be a sexy word, but by God, it's useful. And so the words were really chosen for their usefulness, but also if a child can understand a concept, then they can understand the word. So you may think penultimate's quite a big word for a 7-year-old. But you know, if they can understand ultimate, the last one, then they can understand the one before the last. And if they can know that word, penultimate, well, they wouldn't want to say second to last. They've got that word. So the secret is finding a meaning that a small child isn't equally responsive to every meaning. Many things are too difficult, but many things are not too difficult. And one of the things that I noticed, especially in America, was that vocabulary lists and spelling lists are strangely merged. And it really is a very poor idea, because what belongs on a spelling list is really often not the least bit interesting as a potential writer. So they'll have a word like dangerous on a spelling list. And yes, you need to know how to spell it. But really, there are better words than dangerous. And precarious is a more interesting word. And if you were a child interested in writing, dangerous might not inspire you, but precarious pretty much would. Or a word like descriptive is on a spelling list. That's a dreadful word. When will a child ever use a word like descriptive? But give them a word like nondescript, something so dull that it doesn't even enjoy having a description. It doesn't warrant one. That in itself is immediately interesting. What is a nondescript house? What's a nondescript suit? You know, so we are doing them a misservice by not showing them exciting words that they can use. And interestingly, I trialed these in a school once a week over the course of a month, and they were 10-year-olds, and the teacher reported back. It was interesting, like you wouldn't have thought it, but a word like retaliate was their favorite, and you could hear it all over in the playground. In fact, I'll give you the rhyme if I have it here.
Yes, please.
But yeah, so by giving them permission to use the word and a clear understanding, how I do these rhymes with kids is I spend about 4 or 5 minutes getting them to say the word almost in a skip ropey way, because it's hard to learn a new word. It's hard to learn someone's new name if you haven't heard a name and it's foreign to you. You've got to get those syllables in your head. Well, retaliate, 4 syllables, new. So I might go retaliate, and then I might say it in different robot, retaliate, or whisper it, retaliate, and then do it with a swish, retaliate, and angrily retaliate. So get them comfortable saying the word for a few minutes. And then I usually bring them in. So I'll bring you in, Sarah, as if you were the children, to say the word once they've learnt it. So here's retaliate. If somebody calls you an old kangaroo, you might
retaliate.
And call them one too. If somebody tries to give you a thwack, you might
retaliate
and give them one back. But really, you mustn't respond in this way. No need to
retaliate.
Just walk away.
Yes.
So once you do that 2 or 3 times, it's really without effort. The notion of retaliate, doing something back, is there. And you haven't had to pound it in or ask them to remember it or do any of those things. Right. You just asked them to do a rhyme with you a few times.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Well, and you already mentioned the word penultimate. It's in the very first sentence of the
first one.
book. It's one of my favorite words. I have 5 nieces and refer to the 4th one as the penultimate niece all the time, which makes her roll her eyes. So you had me at the very beginning.
I had you at the beginning. You know, and some of them are shorter and some are longer. I had a lot of fun. I just did a big talk at the Brooklyn Public Library for about 200 or 300 kids, and they absolutely were with me every step of the way for an hour. And the organizer was really surprised I could hold them for an hour with no special effects, just me. And I wasn't the least bit surprised because words are interesting. And if you feed them to children in a way that makes them feel smart and capable, they'll want to do it. So shall I do another one with you?
Yes, give me, let's do another.
I'll give you this one more and then we can talk. Okay, so this was a fun one. And this is a one that's usually taught to older children. And the word is synonymous. Synonymous. Right. You could say, right, and I'll bring you in. You could say slim or you could say thin. The two are
synonymous.
They mean the same thing. You could say evening or you could say night. The two are
synonymous.
They're very much alike. You could say speedy or you could say quick. The two are
synonymous.
They both go at a lick. You could say a load of us or you could say a lot of us. When things are very similar, we say they are
synonymous.
That's it.
I love it. Yes. And it's so much fun to read. And you're right. You say in the beginning, you should read them out loud. And yes, you know, they're fun to read, but they're much more fun to read out loud. And I can imagine reading with a group would be even more fun. How difficult was it to choose only 75 words?
Well, you know, to begin with, the editor looked at them and she sort of said, well, you'll have to lose some from the S section and I had thought, I need one from everyone. And I some I had to give up on. Some words are really so difficult when you drill down and how to say them in a clear way and to do it in rhyme and to do it in a really scanning rhyme. There was one word that was my favorite word in the book, but it didn't make it into the book because it wasn't a word that they would really use. And I wonder if you ever use the word abstruse.
In context, in a set, I don't think I have, but I've read
well,
it.
Here's my perfect definition, but it didn't make it into the book because it wasn't useful. But the word for my definition for abstruse was, if this definition was actually abstruse, you wouldn't understand it then, which wouldn't be much use.
Yes. No, I'm trying to think, and I do not think I've ever used it.
Well, you know, it is very specific. It's like for physics or something that's so densely complicated. Yeah. So I didn't want to be indulgent and just use a word because I liked it or had a neat thing. I wanted to make sure it was useful. And so sometimes a very short one. And, you know, when I was a child, I didn't use the word acrimonious. But now that I know it, I want to use it all the time. So that can be a very short one, which is for acrimonious. When a conversation is not the least harmonious, but full of angry bitterness, we say it's acrimonious.
Yes.
And just having that thing, and you can see then how a child, even as young as 5, if a situation is tense, they'll have the word for it. And why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't they? You know, it's like a shade of a meaning, like a color in a paint thing, to be able to use it. So and then I did something. I don't have the book with me because I've just given my last copy away, but I didn't have anything under X. And the reason I didn't, I don't know if you have a book there, but it's because when the dictionary was first written, there were no X words, and Samuel Johnson put it together. And now there are really very few. There's less than sort of 100 good ones, and there are really very few nouns. We only go back to X-ray and xylophone. Yes. So instead, I used words that began with EX in that section, because people really kill themselves to put a xylophone in, and there's really no point. So I wanted words that were useful. I wanted words that would embed themselves. And what I probably didn't add into the school thing was that these lessons I gave apparently changed the dynamic of the children with vocabulary, but really significantly, both in written work, so in exams and written work, that the words over the course of 4 workshops, I only taught 10 words, so 3 words a session. It's only so much you can take on board, but that's how I did it. But apparently, in the playground, you could hear words like retaliate. In written and spoken communication, it was different. But the most important thing was they all felt like wordy people. They wanted to go on learning words. It had created a genuine appetite, just like the one you have. And it's a natural one. We should all have it. If we're fed it, that hunger.
Yeah.
But if you're given a word like dangerous to learn and not precarious, that side of you will begin to close off. Words don't seem interesting.
Yeah.
So we want them to be interesting.
Yep. And so that's pretty much your goal for readers and readers who are probably reading with grown-ups. You want them to come away with those words in a way that they can actually use them. Yeah.
Yes, very much. And also in England, particularly, there's of all the countries, perhaps there's a real a joy of words, and that goes right across classes, taxi drivers, anybody, a fun of using the right word, a great use of puns and stuff. So by teaching them with rhyme, you're also teaching them not just meaning, but the fun of words. And that really is awfully important.
Yeah. There's also a quote on each page, often from a book that maybe children have read. There's a lot from Harry Potter. There's some from Alice in Wonderland. I think there's a lot of quotes. How difficult was that to find?
That was really difficult. And even though my children, one is in tech, he said, couldn't you just put the title in and the word that you're looking for? There was no way around it other than going through whole text to find a word used in context. And then sometimes you'd find a wonderful quote. And it was just so exciting to find it. Like, I'm just looking at the quote from C.S. Lewis, and this is who wrote Narnia. And he got many books and many letters from children across the world. And so to go with my rhyme for the word adjective, I have his quote, which tells children not to use too many, but to describe things in ways that are meaningful. Don't just chuck in adjectives. So that was a very nice, a nice thing. And it was really very exciting to find the perfect quote, because it really it made everything come alive. So yes, the quote for retaliate by Booker T. Washington, sometimes it's better to walk away than to retaliate. So that's perfect. And that's a prompts a discussion, doesn't it? Well, what does that mean? And why would you? And so anything that prompts real thought is interesting to me.
Yeah. Yeah, especially with a word like retaliate, because you've taught them what it means, and then you've brought in sort of the flip side of it is to, sometimes you don't retaliate.
Exactly.
I really do love how much care and thought went into the crafting of each word's poem definition. Just, first of all, so that they can be read out loud and in a fun chanting way that's fun to say, but also just the words and the number of times the word is used in a rhyme. There's so many good things to love about the care that went into the crafting of this book. We're going to take our second break of this episode. When we come back, we're talking about the illustrations included in the book. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review podcast and my conversation with author Colette Hiller. Before the break, she was going through a lot of the different processes that she goes through in order to create the poems that go with these words, and all of the ideas and just everything that she did in order to create 75 poems for 75 words, the choosing of the words, the creating of the poems, etc. Let's go ahead now and return to the conversation with Colette.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about the pictures, because it's very bright and colorful and fun? How was your relationship with the illustrator?
It's a really
did you have much input?
I insisted. I'm a very get in the way kind of writer, but on these, each illustration has to further the meaning. So it's not just decorative, but it has to make the meaning clearer. And you hope that and often the illustrator brings some ideas, but sometimes you have to really, they're doing many books and you're doing yours. But for example, for the word oblivious, I had a quote, which was Einstein saying, when I'm in the sea, I'm oblivious to the problems of the world. But the illustration was Einstein in a boat in the sea. But that really didn't tell oblivious. And it didn't tell oblivious till we put a shark in the water. And then you have to be oblivious to the shark. So it was really important that the clarity of meaning, it wasn't indulgent, that it was there to do a visual picture of the meaning. And so that was, and sometimes it was a challenge, often. So if a word like magnanimous, it's a terrific word, but I make a point of saying, it's quietly generous. There's no overt fuss. So to begin with, I thought of Sir Walter Raleigh putting down a red carpet for Queen Elizabeth, but that's the opposite of magnanimous. That's showing off. So you really want to be very accurate and careful.
Right. Yeah.
Something
like magnanimous, it's actually hard to illustrate. When you brought up that word, I'm thinking in my brain, I don't know how to illustrate that.
Right. I can't remember what we did now, but it was always not as obvious as you might think.
Yeah.
I'm looking at, say, precarious. The illustration for precarious is Humpty Dumpty falling off the wall.
Yes.
Yeah, and so and for penultimate, there are these penguins, and it says, yes, but it's very interesting. How do you get that clarity? Because your success as a writer of these is that they know the words. And if they haven't looked at the word and the picture and made that connection, then I haven't succeeded.
Yeah, because everyone learns just a little bit differently. So some people are visual and they're going to, that picture is going to stick with them more than the words. So you want the picture to be accurate.
It's a mixture, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What age group would you say?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of, I know that there's a lot of adults that don't know a lot of these words, and I didn't want to make these just boffiny words. And honestly, I didn't use the word capacious very much till I wrote this book, and now I use it all the time. A capacious mind or bag or pot has the capacity to hold a lot. Mm-hmm. So now I use it all the time. So it was intended for 7 to 11s, but I think that there are many 16-year-olds that won't know a great many of these words.
Yeah.
And it's really a shame, because there should be 3 or 4 books like this, and that would be all the words a high school kid would really need. I mean, in terms of non-specific words. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you write another one, another 75 words, or?
I would. But they're really time consuming. One rhyme can take, several days and not get it right, and even longer. So the whole thing is very time consuming. Also, within each rhyme, you try to, everyone doesn't do this, but you try to use the word in context many times. So like when we did synonymous, it kept coming up. It's really important that you don't just say the meaning and then use the word once, but that you keep on saying the two are synonymous, the two are synonymous, the two are synonymous. Right. That's how it embeds.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's so much easier. I mean, I'm thinking back to school and just having to memorize a definition,
right?
And it sticks
a crazy
with you
way.
it sticks with you as you memorize it for the test.
It's a crazy way. And also it's a crazy way to do lists. You, really, you think, when was the last time you learned a new word? Or me? Really a long time ago. It's like a name or something. And it takes a long time. I'll forget their name or I'll forget that word. So we're asking these young kids to suddenly memorize and the meaning and everything, loads of words. It's a crazy way to teach. That actually one word a week, using it all the time, points for using it, and it gets in your head. It's like language teaching. We don't teach foreign languages till that window of opportunity is closed in a child, 14. Yeah. When they really are prime learners of language at 7, and the same thing happens here, because we want them to love using these words, and we don't want them to be lazy about grammar. We don't want them to be lazy about finding the right word.
Yeah. Another thing I like, I just remembered, was when on the page for hyperbole, you have a little note about the pronunciation of it, because if you look at that word, it says hyperbole.
You think it's
right?
Hyperbole.
Yeah, and it made me think of you. There's a lot of Harry Potter quotes, and a lot of American kids went through their whole 7 books saying Hermione, until in one of the books she actually tells Victor Crumb how to pronounce it, and it's spelled out phonetically. And there were so many American kids who were like, Hermione.
It's true. That is sweet, but it doesn't worry me. What I want them to do is realize it's like having a cupboard full of spices, and these all belong to them. They're not barging into someone else's cupboard. And so each of these things has a specific meaning, and you wouldn't want to say second to last when you could say penultimate. And it's exactly that. And once you've got it, you've got it.
Yeah.
You don't need to have memorized it. It's there. And so that approach, I really think we've taken the wrong approach to words with kids, both in the age we teach them and what we teach them and how we teach them.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about the bee on my thumb? Just kind of give an overview of that one as well?
Okay, just very briefly, that if you think about it, isn't it crazy that we start teaching with A and end with Z or Z? Why would we? It's so arbitrary. I mean, S is a much more interesting sound. What has a sound to start with rather than A? So we drift into these things without questioning them. And I taught my twins to read when they were 3. And I think not because they were geniuses, although they are, but almost any child could learn to, if you want to teach them, without it being arduous. They're different ways. But you could start with a double O sound. That could be the first thing they learn. Anytime you see 2 O's, ooh, what does that mean? Ooh, you can see they lend themselves to fun and sound. Yeah. And we don't need to be going A, B, C. You can be more ing. Anytime you see ing together, ing, really in no time you've got them saying ing. So yeah. It's a slightly just it's an interesting. We've made such a fuss of how we teach to read, and it's really so fast and so much fun and so easy. We've made it a big medicine cabinet when it doesn't need to be.
Well, I'm currently at almost 50 years old trying to learn Portuguese, and I'm just thinking I would love for you to write me a whole bunch of rhymes for Portuguese, because there's some great sounds, but
Miss. Do you know that person? I'll send you his name, Michael, the language guru that died, who was so extraordinary and found a new way of teaching language. And he escaped from the Nazis 3 times, and he did a fantastic experiment. Michael, you'll come back, Michelle. He teaches many languages. He died about 8 years ago, as a completely different way to teach. So I'll send you his thing. But they did an example of him, and they took him into an English secondary school or high school, and all he did for 8 weeks was teach French. And at the end of that 8 weeks, those kids had learned more in that 8 weeks than they would have learned in 4 years. And it was just the method.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing the way we can.
Mind you, you've chosen a difficult language, a really difficult one.
Yeah. Yeah. I need help with verbs. That's for sure. So
should I tell you what I'm working on now? I've just signed a contract with Simon & Schuster for 2 new books. And before that, I have a book coming out with a wonderful company called Magic Cat. It's an independent that's doing very well. And it's a true story about an elephant in Thailand who was very sad, and how an English piano player came and brought a piano to the elephant in the jungle and how that changed his life. And so that's coming up next.
Nice.
And that's called The Elephant and the Piano. And then with Simon and Schuster, the first book that they're putting out is called Things You Can Teach Your Grown Up. And it's about all sorts of things that children can teach their parents to do.
So you've had lots and lots of very fun sounding aspects to your career. What made you to finally decide to try to write for publication?
I don't know. I think I have a very good agent, and I had to. It's about projects, isn't it? You believe in your idea. When I wrote The Bee on Your Thumb, I just believed. I knew it worked, and when I wrote Colossal, I knew it worked. And I knew that the elephant story was so good, someone would pick it up immediately, and they did. So that's interesting. And I'm also about to embark on a master's degree in children's literature, not from a writing perspective, but from a critical analysis point of view. So I'll learn something about the history of children's literature and what makes a work endure, and which are the works that parents like, but children don't necessarily. All sorts of questions that I'll be finding out and investigating.
Fun. Yeah, that sounds great. Do you have one piece of advice that you would give for someone who thinks they have a story to share?
Sure. Get simple. And when you think it's simple, get simpler still. When it begins to be complicated in your head, get it uncomplicated. Get it back to simplicity. Don't let project creep carry on, and so it gets more complicated. It's all about the simplicity of what you're saying. And I guess I'm a fan of E.B. White, Stuart Little, and he wrote a book on language, and it's a very good one, and of economy of words and using as few as you can to still get something. But don't think when you're writing something, don't think it has to have 10,000 layers and be multidimensional. No, that'll stop you writing it, and it'll get it complicated. Keep it simple and keep it on one page to begin with, so that your idea is really consolidated.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. When you take time to read for you, favorite authors and genres?
I like an English writer called Rose Tremaine very much, and if you don't know her, many wonderful things that she's considered really a very fine writer. I've just finished Long Island by Colm Tóibín, the sequel to Brooklyn, and I thought it was very poignant, and he's really a very good writer, although a very irritating ending.
Oh no!
No, irritating ending. Funny, when I go back on the children's books that influenced me, and I guess I'll be looking at them in my master's degree. I liked writers like Frances Hodgson Burnett. I loved A Little Princess. I loved things where not fantasy, but where the world sort of yields some wonderful result. And I liked Narnia, and I liked the Oz books and Stuart Little. And then as a sort of 10-year-old, I liked any book that had a series. I liked to gobble up many in the series, whether it was Little House on the Prairie, whatever. There needed to be lots to move on to. And one of my favorite books was in the last few years was Elizabeth Gilbert's book, The Signature of All Things, which was nothing like Eat, Pray, Love, although that was a very clever book. But this really told a story of a botanist in the 18th century, and it was just a gorgeous book. So that was one that I loved. And the Rose Tremaine book that I would recommend is called The Road Home.
Okay, thank you. I know we could spend hours just talking about everyone's favorite books. It's hard to choose. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if it's completely fair to ask about favorite authors and genres, because we all have so many of them, right? And it's so hard to choose just a few to give in the space of the time you have in an interview. And we are going to take our final break of this episode. But remember that we were talking about books, because when we come back, you're going to find out why I ask the questions, not answer the questions in interviews. You are tuned in to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back. Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Colette Hiller. Before the break, Colette was sharing some of her favorite authors and genres, and we are going to continue with that conversation. So here is the conclusion of that interview with Colette Hiller.
Which is your favorite, Sarah?
Oh, Lord.
Or what are you reading?
Well, like you mentioned Little House on the Prairie. I was obsessed with those as a kid, but oh gosh. See, this is why I ask the questions. I don't answer the questions because
it's always hard with books. It is very hard with books to think of what am I actually reading or really enjoying, and so many titles aren't memorable. And we often go back to things that we loved earlier. I mean, I come from a literary mother, and I'm named after the writer Colette, whom she wrote about, and she also wrote about Proust, but I'm not named Proust or Marcel. But I grew up very much aware of words and aware of a canon of literature. And now I live very near Samuel Johnson's house. And Samuel Johnson was the person that wrote the dictionary. And you know, when the dictionary was written in English, there was no other dictionary to look upon. So he just set out to read everything that had ever been written and start from there.
Yeah. just a small task, no big deal.
There weren't that many books then, but yeah,
still, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things in London is that we have rhyming slang, which you may know about, and that's, yes, and so that's used by. I live in a kind of Cockney area, and that fun of words and the play of words, and so apples and pears will be stairs, and then that will be aborted to apples. She went up the apples. So there's a kind of enjoyment of words.
Yeah.
I hope my book.
But if you don't know what's going on, that conversation makes absolutely no sense. But it is fascinating. I've always thought so. Colette, I know you have a website, so if you can share where people can find your website and if you're active on any social media.
Oh, right. So it's ColetteHiller.com. And I think my publisher and agent do the social media. I don't even exactly know what it is. I don't even have a mobile phone. So, I mean, people keep buying me them, but then I don't turn them on, or I don't know where I put them. I know.
I'm just picturing a room in your house that has stacks of mobile phones that you're not using.
I never use them. Yeah, so I'm thinking if there's one more thing. Just that I have a list of things to do. So this is just some pointers to parents. I'm just going to rattle through a few just to end on teaching words. 1, less is more. 1 or 2 new words a week is ample. 2, choose the right time. Don't barge into your child's time when they're busy talking or doing or something. You don't want to say, hey, squeeze in, let me get room for this. No, it has to be a time where they'll like it. And you might say, is now a good time? And they'll say, time for what? And you say, time for a rhyme. And then off you go. So the timing, especially with kids, is important. 3, don't do any heavy lifting. Leave all the banal, dull words like descriptive. Leave those to the classroom. You don't have to do that. Leave all of those to the classroom. Choose the words you enjoy saying. Then, as I explained before, start the whole thing out by teaching them to say the word itself and spend some time with that, because spend about 4 or 5 minutes repeating the word in different ways so it feels comfortable with them. Read the rhyme aloud and bring them in to say the key word, as I did with you. And use the word all week. Squeeze it in wherever possible. Penultimate, just everyone has to keep squeezing that word in and you get sort of points, so that there's a sense of fun and introduction to each word, and 2 a week is sufficient.
Perfect. Yeah, I love that, because the more you use them, I know there's been studies done on how many times you have to use a word right after learning it before it'll stick in your brain. So you don't want to learn a word and then just lose it.
Right. And you can see it, like, let's say you'd done the rhyme with synonymous and the next day they'd forgotten the word, the meaning. But you did the rhyme again. The whole rhythm, the meaning, the thing goes in. And by the 3rd time, it really is there. And you don't need to cement it down. It's actually there.
Yeah. Well, and I was just gonna say, how many of us remember, like, I can recite something that rhymes from that I learned, I don't know, I was 6 or something, and still decades later I can rattle that off.
And also there's one thing I didn't say that I think is important, which is a dictionary definition is going to be more elaborate, but actually much harder to put in your head, not just to remember, but to understand. Because, say, for retaliate, it might say to do one act in exchange for another. So the child has to take that meaning and translate it. What does that even mean? And then put it into English. So the whole thing is translated for them in the rhyme.
Yeah.
The meaning becomes clear. And that, because in a dictionary it can be long-winded, and then you have to translate it in your head. What is it actually telling me? But you don't have to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything, Colette, that we haven't covered that you wanted to make sure that we highlighted at this point?
No, just that I would love teachers to get this, parents that want their kids to be smart, and yeah, and I hope, it would be lovely if some of the conferences that are about education and stuff, if there was ever a way to sort of squeeze into any of those places, because I guess the thing I'd end on is that there are very few things that are genuinely new and that really, really, really work. They're not just pretending to work. But when you find a method that is new and really works, you want to tell everyone, use this method because it really works.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to say thank you so much. I mean, first for writing the book, because it's so much fun and it's so educational, but also for taking the time to talk to me about the book. I really appreciate your time.
Great. Well, I've had such fun, and thank you for arranging it. And I will look forward to meeting you in due course.
That would be great. Thank you so much. And thank you once again to Colette for joining me. I so enjoyed this book. As I said, I love vocabulary. Yeah, I know I've said it about 6 times in this episode, but I really do. I love words, and so this book just made me happy on so many levels. It is a great opportunity to teach children of all ages some new words, some colossal words, if you will, and it's fun. The rhymes are fun. You can read them together. You can share stories around those words and talk about, like, if you have a love of vocabulary, or even if you don't, maybe you'll learn some new words too. I think that people of all ages can learn something from this book. Plus, you've got the quotes. You've got something that I thought was fun is that, as you hear, Colette is English, so some of the words are ones that maybe aren't quite as familiar to us Americans. For instance, the word whinge is used instead of whine. I love the word whinge. I just think it sounds so much more whingy. It's very descriptive. It's not an onomatopoeia, but it just feels more. It's a good word. Anyway, instead of whine, whinge. I like it at any rate. This is definitely a book that you should check out if you are looking to expand the vocabulary of a child of pretty much any age. It's so much fun. Thank you for joining me for this episode. I hope you will join me for the next episode when I will be talking to author Libby Cudmore about her book Negative Girl. It is described as an evocative, moody neo-noir thriller that explores obsession and people dying in across America's forgotten spaces. Did you catch that word? Thriller? We're back into the thriller and suspense books for another, I think, 2 interviews. Although I would say that this one is more mystery than thriller. But, you, of course, can be the judge of that. Please join me for this episode with Libby as we talk about Negative Girl on the next episode. Thank you again for joining me for this episode and the interview with Colette. As always, if you are a fan of this podcast and you have not done so already, please do like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you are either listening to or watching this episode on. That way you'll always know when there are new episodes. It also helps the algorithm and gets this podcast out to more readers. You can also help the podcast by leaving a positive review. That is very, very appreciated. Doesn't have to be complicated. Don't overthink it. I'm projecting because I'm an overthinker, but it can be anything. It can be very simple. So it does help get the podcast out to more people, and I greatly appreciate any support that you give. If you are on social media and you want to follow the podcast on social media, you can do so on Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok. Love hearing from you always. Come tell me what you're reading. Ask me questions that I can then think about and don't have to answer in real time, as you saw at the end of, or the beginning of this last segment. But in the meantime, I hope you're having a wonderful week. I hope whatever the week throws at you, it also gives you plenty of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you next time.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to